There's still a lot of work to be done for the Dallas Mavericks, and in this video, we're going to be talking about offseason moves that they can make, roster moves, what their free agency looks like, some fake trades later on in the video as well, but it's important to point out that this is a team that prior to this year, I was questioning their ability to retain Luka Doncic long-term. There was turmoil in the front office. They replaced their head coach with a guy in Jason Kidd that I did not like very much, and a couple of months ago, they made the Kristaps Porzingis trade. They turned things around, and they go on this conference finals run, and to me, they have an opportunity to truly be contenders for at least the next couple of years, and in this video, we're going to talk about how they can help accelerate that this offseason. So Dallas is in a really interesting position this offseason because that Kristaps Porzingis trade that they made at the deadline opens up a lot of things for them. Not necessarily in terms of free agency this offseason, although it does get easier on down the road, but they have a lot of movable, like mid-tier contracts that really allow them to look at a variety of different trade possibilities that wouldn't have been there if KP was still on the roster. And we're going to talk about trades and things like that, but primarily I think we need to talk about free agency for Dallas initially, because pretty much everybody is signed for next season with the exception of Jalen Brunson. And Brunson is a guy whose value has skyrocketed over the last couple of months. He was always seen as like a pretty good guard once he really broke into the Mavs rotation, but struggled in the playoffs last year. And this year really became invaluable for them as a secondary playmaker, as someone that can play with Luka, as someone that can play without him. And even though they brought in Spencer Dinwiddie, who obviously helped them on the perimeter at times, the consistent secondary scoring came almost entirely from Jalen Brunson, at least in terms of creation. And so now as an unrestricted free agent this offseason, Dallas has some big decisions to make for him because they're already at like $150 million in payroll for this upcoming season. They can make some moves to lighten that a little bit, but they're going to be a luxury tax team if they retain Jalen Brunson. And we're looking at like $15 to $20 million a year for this guy potentially. And as good as he is, that might be a little bit too much for Dallas's taste. He certainly could go elsewhere. However, it seems like based off all the reports that we're getting, they're going to be really motivated to retain Jalen Brunson, especially coming off of a Western Conference Finals run. You're going now into kind of the second stage of Luka's career. His rookie contract is over. He's going on to this big like super max rookie extension basically. And it would be difficult to just let someone like Jalen Brunson walk and not get value in exchange for him. There are possibilities there in terms of sign and trades. It gets a little bit messy when you have to do a sign and trade. It would be easier if Brunson was on a contract and you looked to trade him later on, and maybe that's what they'll plan on doing. But my guess is Jalen Brunson is going to be on this roster next year unless there's some kind of unforeseen trade. And then as you look at the rest of the roster, obviously around Luka, a lot of these guys are weirdly critical. There's an obvious need for an upgrade at the 5 spot. We're going to talk about that later with some of these fake trades, but everybody else, I mean, like Maxi Kleber is someone that was really critical for them in the postseason, can defend better than most people expect him to, and is a great spacer as well. Reggie Bullock, Dorian Finney-Smith is very helpful. Like I said, Dinwiddie had some good moments. There's really, like, even though there's tradable contracts, there's not that many tradable players because the guys that they have are almost perfect for this roster. Like they have a couple of wings that can shoot and defend, guys like Bullock, guys like Finney-Smith. They have a couple of bigs that can space, guys like Kleber, and then they have a couple of perimeter playmakers outside of Luka that can play on or off the ball in Brunson and Dinwiddie. And so when you're looking at, hey, how do we change this up? How do we really improve? There's actually not a lot of movable assets, especially coming off of a season where you made this great run of the Western Conference Finals. And so the conclusion that I've come to as I really looked at the overview for this roster is they're actually in a really difficult spot in terms of like massive improvements. Of course, Luka is going to continue to get better. And as long as you have an MVP caliber player like him on your roster, you're going to be at least a semi-contender. And they've done a good job, a better job than I had realized of putting players around him that fit, that can shoot, that can defend. But like there's no massive asset here on this roster. There's no one thing you could look to move unless it's Jalen Brunson in a sign and trade, which like I said, gets a little bit difficult. However, there are two different players that I would expect them to really explore moving this offseason. One of them is Spencer Dinwiddie because he does provide a good amount of value on the court and his contract isn't too bad. And Dwight Powell being the other, who's an $11 million expiring contract, someone that is now in his 30s, is a good player, but it's definitely a spot that they need to upgrade. And they really only need one big on this roster, assuming that Kleber is going to be able to stay healthy because he can kind of be the backup 5 and provide all the spacing that they need at the 5 spot. And so looking to move one or both of those guys, combine their salaries are right around $30 million. You can make a lot of moves with those two salaries together, and whether it be providing cap flexibility in the case of Dwight Powell, or some value in addition to some cap flexibility in a year or two in the form of Spencer Dinwiddie, I think both those guys are pretty movable assets. And again, the big spot to improve here is absolutely the 5 spot, and that's a good thing for Dallas because there's a couple of guys on the trade market right now that I think certainly would be gettable. What Dallas needs is they need a lob threat for Luka, and they need someone that really provides a legitimate presence at the 5. As nice as it is to have incredible floor spacing with guys like Maxi Kleber, there are times in the postseason where you need an anchor big. You need a guy that can defend the rim. You need size. You need physicality. In Dallas, as the playoffs were on, specifically in that Warriors series, they were so reliant on shooting the ball well from 3 that they became very one-dimensional, and you need something else at that 5 spot that Dwight Powell just was not able to provide them. And so as we get to these fake trades, the first option, of course, is going to be Rudy Gobert. There's a ton of rumors, there's a ton of buzz out there about not only Utah looking to trade Rudy Gobert this offseason, but potentially a fit with him in Dallas. It's weird because they just played him, in the playoffs, but I've done the Rudy Gobert rant before. Defensively in the playoffs, it's not that bad, and he was really the only reason Utah was half decent defensively at any point this season. It's just, the issue for him is offensively not being able to punish mismatches. That won't be as big of a deal in Dallas because they have other options. Like, they have a plan B if they're in a playoff series and Gobert can't punish the other team. They have other options. They can put Kleber out there, they can go small, and everything's fine. In this example, Utah would be getting Spencer Dinwiddie, Dwight Powell, Josh Green, and a first-round pick from Dallas this year, which is the 26th pick in the draft. So this would have to happen kind of like on draft night because they already owe their 23 pick to New York. The reason this would make sense for Utah is if this was their version of the Kristaps Porzingis trade, right? Like, this is their version of turning one big contract, which Gobert's contract is incredibly big over the next couple of seasons. I mean, it's prohibitive almost to making other roster moves, which is why I think his value is a little bit lower in this trade than maybe you would expect. Maybe you think this is too much. It's always kind of hard to find that balance. But for Utah, you're splitting that big contract into 2 other deals that are not only smaller in money, but they're also shorter. You get Josh Green, who could be a good wing for you, and you get a first-round pick that you could use to make other moves. And this doesn't make you better in an immediate sense, but it makes you leaner, it makes you more flexible, and maybe potentially more, I was going to say more happy, potentially happier, with the Mitchell Gobert thing kind of solved and moved on from. So similar to where Dallas was, where KP and Luka didn't quite get along. It was a weird fit on the court. You felt like you had to prioritize KP way more than you should have. You move on from that, smaller contracts, and then potentially you're in a better spot. And obviously for Dallas, Rudy Gobert is a lob threat alongside Luka Doncic would be incredible and would continue to improve their ability to guard defensively as well. In kind of a similar structure is another big that I think could be available this offseason for Dallas, and that's Clint Capela. They already have Onyeka Okongwu, who I think is going to be pretty good for them. Like, I think we're at the point now where Clint Capela is a bit of a luxury for Atlanta. And again, if they want to get a little bit leaner, if they want to create some space, if they want to get some extra assets, moving Clint Capela to Dallas could be a move that makes sense. In this scenario, they're getting Powell, Chris, and Green. Again, Powell and Chris mostly here for salary cap purposes, and then Green, who could be an asset, and then the pick as well. Again, maybe you think there should be more or less value there. You can argue about that in the comments if you'd like to, but structurally and logistically, it would make sense for Dallas to bring in someone like Clint Capela, who is cheaper than Rudy Gobert, is still locked in on a long-term contract, and again, is a lob threat and a defensive presence and an anchor that you need. Meanwhile, for Atlanta, you're getting leaner. You're not dealing with the long-term contract to Capela, and you could use either Green or this first-round pick to potentially go after some kind of star trade this offseason, whether that be Zach LaVine or otherwise, as Clint Capela is not really that much of an asset in that scenario. And then lastly is a guy that's going to be in a ton of trade rumors videos this offseason, and that's Jeremy Grant. In this scenario, Detroit is getting Dinwiddie, Green, and the first-round pick this year, the 26th pick that has been in each of these other deals, as well as a first-round pick in 2027 as well. So Detroit is getting what they've reportedly asked for in any Jeremy Grant trade, which is 2 future first-round picks. Then you're getting Josh Green as well, who again could be somewhat of an asset, and Dinwiddie, who's a larger contract that you can move. Maybe he plays well in Detroit, you can move him along to another team and get some value there. It's not fantastic compensation in exchange for Jeremy Grant. I know that Detroit likes him, but as his contract is kind of running out here, those future first-round picks could really help Detroit, and unless they think they're going to be much better this season and potentially push for the playoffs, I don't really see a reason to keep Jeremy Grant and then sign him to another long-term deal, especially with a high pick in this draft and potentially bringing in someone that could use the minutes that Jeremy Grant is currently taking up. And for Dallas, it doesn't solve the 5-spot issue, but that's something that's relatively easy to solve in free agency. You can kind of mix and match some 5s together, but Jeremy Grant provides them more versatility, another wing scorer, another wing defender, and as long as he can space alongside Luka, he should be a nice addition, and I think could play some small ball 5 there as well, if that's something that he's interested in doing. But those 3 trades really, I think, illustrate where Dallas is at this offseason. They could do absolutely nothing. They could bring back Jalen Brunson, maybe add another 5 in free agency on a small deal and be really good next season. They could still be a conference finals team, maybe even a finals team next year, given how good they've become defensively, how great Luka is, and the spacing they've surrounded him with. However, there's also a scenario in which they lose in the first round next year. It feels like they've taken a step back and things get a little bit frustrating for them. I do think that the path toward contention for Dallas is very, very easy, right? Just keep Luka happy, surround him with shooting and spacing, have some secondary playmakers, add a 5, and you're fine. But if you're looking to make a more significant move, if you're looking to really push the envelope, to really raise the ceiling of this team, these 3 trades are the kind of moves you'd have to look at making. There is no, in my opinion, Zach LaVine trade here for Dallas. Like, I don't think they have the assets to bring someone in like that. There's no Bradley Beal trade here for Dallas. They don't have the cap space to sign anybody. They don't have the assets to trade for a player of that caliber. However, I do think they're very close to having the contracts and the assets to bring in Rudy Gobert, Clint Capela, or Jeremy Grant. And I think any of those moves would certainly be a ceiling raiser for Dallas, even though maybe you're concerned about the long-term health of Capela, certainly the long-term contract of Gobert, and potentially the fit of Jeremy Grant as well. But these are the kinds of moves, these not lateral, but not crazy ceiling raising moves either. That's the world that Dallas is living in this offseason. But the bottom line is, you've got Luka, you made an incredible run in the Western Conference Finals. There's momentum behind your organization, and that is a great place to be if you're Dallas, and I can't wait to see how they capitalize on that this offseason.